Three, two, one. Good afternoon, everybody. It is August 22nd, 2025. I am Lisa Salberg, founder and CEO of the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association. And today it is my pleasure to bring you a presentation that will explain a really important concept about the need for better clinical trial endpoints for patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And I am joined today by, oh my goodness, Rich, I don't even know how long I've known you. Probably 25-year relationship with Rich and his team at one of our HCMA recognized centers of excellence, all the way down there. And you have so many names. So Washington University, Barnes Jewish, and just Center of Excellence Extraordinaire in your region. And you're going to talk to us a little bit about how KCCQ has been used in prior clinical trials. And as somebody who's been deeply invested in the HCM community for many years, I appreciate your insight on that for this event. And then a newer friend, but a face I think a lot of you are going to get to know in the HCM space, Dr. Charles Sherrod, who is working directly with John Spurtis and the team to work on improvements to the KCCQ, which some of you may have heard of before or taken. And just welcome both of you to this presentation. And I'm going to get our slides going. I'll be controlling slides today. So Charles, just give me the next slide, please, as we go. And here we go. So I already told you who we all are and what we're doing here. I wanted to give you a little backstory. Oops, I got to do it over here. In October of 2023, the HCMA convened a think tank to evaluate what we could do to help create better, meaningful endpoints for clinical trials in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. There were a number of key takeaways, and one of which is to evaluate existing tools to modify them to better fit the needs of the HCM community. So that is what we started to do, and it's almost 2 years ago. During around that same time, maybe a little bit before then, HCMA started to collect data, and that data was related to something called New York Heart Association class. Many of you may have seen in your medical records, your doctor refer to your New York Heart Association class, and they give you a number, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. The problem with this system for evaluating symptomatic impact for HCM patients is we don't tend to stay in one New York Heart Association class. We tend to bounce around. So on a good day, we may not feel any symptoms at all. On an average day, we may feel some symptoms, but they're not limiting. And on a bad day, we may have a difficult time functioning. On a really bad day, we may not function at all. So 1 is, I don't have limitations. 2 is a little bit of limitations. 3 is more. And 4 tends to be our transplant folks. So as you can see, if we were using somebody's New York Heart Association class as an independent endpoint, that would mean, did this drug or therapy work well or not? With data that's sporadic, we would have a really hard time knowing. So we've used something called KCCQ, and I'm going to have Dr. Bach explain to you how it's been used in a couple of previous clinical trials. And we do have some people in the back of the meeting here. If you have any additional questions on that, we're happy to take them that might be able to answer them. So Rich, could you talk to us a little bit about how KCCQ has been used in research?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa, for introducing me earlier too. And I just want whoever's listening in the audience here to understand, some of this work, which is very important, comes out of the Kansas City group with Charles here and Dr. Spurtis as a leader in this field. And they created the KCCQ as a tool that would better express patients' functional limitations, patients' symptoms, in a more granular and quantitative way than something as simple and perhaps non-granular as the New York Heart Association classification. This slide, I think, is very important. I hope you can see, although it's a little bit small because there's a lot of information on this slide. This is an example of how the KCCQ can be used in the clinical trial setting to give us a better expression of patients' experience with a new therapeutic agent. I'll just introduce the graphics on the right of this slide. They come from a clinical trial, recent one. Some of you may be familiar with it, called KCCQ-HCM, which is a clinical trial of aficamten, the second in class of the myosin inhibitors, and how patients responded in that 28-week trial of randomized and blinded treatment between aficamten and control. And I'll walk through that in a moment. But first, to look at, what it is we're talking about, the KCCQ. It's a questionnaire with 23 questions that actually express a number of different aspects of the symptom burden and functional limitations as a result, in this circumstance, of having hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Some example of the questions there is on the left-hand panel. Some of you may have filled out these surveys, these KCCQ questionnaires, will recognize that it has a gradation that allows you to express the frequency of the symptoms, the amount they're causing functional limitations or interfering with day-to-day activity levels, the impact they're having on quality of life, and by allowing us to get a more quantitative and detailed estimate of those aspects, which are shown graphically somewhat in the middle panel. If you look at that panel, you can see that KCCQ is designed to pick up both symptoms and functional limitations. And as a combination of all of the questions put together, we get an overall summary score of the limitations for a patient and their symptom burden that affects their quality of life. So it really gives us a quantitative estimate on a scale of 0 to 100 on how much impact on quality of life, symptom burden, and functional limitations a particular patient may have by their disease process. In this case, very relevant to HCM, which impairs quality of life and function for most individuals who have symptoms from it. And that's obviously very common. And having a way of quantitatively express this is a big advantage to me in understanding how a patient responds to a new treatment. So now if we go to that panel on the right side, even though it's relatively small, let me walk you through it for just a couple of moments because I think it's so important. I want to give kudos to Charles and Dr. Spertus here, because this really, to me, is a way of expressing the response to a medication that's much more informative than simply the primary endpoint of Sequoia, for instance, was a change in peak VO2 on a cardiopulmonary stress test. But when I see a number, 1.8 improvement in peak VO2, it does not express to me how the patient feels. It doesn't express to me how the medication is affecting their quality of life and the burden the symptoms are creating in their lifestyle. And so this quantitative data, and it's shown graphically here, is a much more user-friendly, patient-friendly, and clinician-friendly way of expressing the effect that the medication is having for these individuals. Now, to the left side of that right-hand panel, and Lisa's pointing there to those two graphics, the red line represents the change in KCCQ over time. You see the scale on the horizontal axis is number of weeks in the trial, comparing the patients who are randomized. And remember, the patients are blinded to medication they're receiving, as are the clinicians that are caring for those patients. But the blue line represents the patients randomized to receive placebo treatment, and the red line, those patients randomized to receive the aficamten in the study. And what becomes very obvious is that if you realize that the KCCQ and improvement in symptoms is represented as an increase in that numerical scale. So if we're starting out in the range of 60 to 70 for the numerical scale, higher numbers are an improvement in symptoms. It becomes obvious that very early after the initiation of the treatment, there's an improvement in symptoms and in functional limitations. And the overall summary score improves by a quite significant amount during the 24 weeks of treatment. And then interestingly to me, this is something I'm very intrigued by, but you can see during that washout period, which is to the right-hand side of that same graphic, when the patients are withdrawn from aficamten, there's a dramatic decline in the score, meaning their symptoms worsen again. So very strong evidence here that there's very substantial improvement in symptoms and in quality of life by randomization to receive aficamten in the trial. And once that medication is removed, we go back, even in a sense, worse than our baseline here, because patients understand now how much better they could feel. Now, in this particular graphic, you see there's another graph below, which is an expression of a different metric called the Seattle Angina Questionnaire. And it does express some of the limitation of the KCCQ, that the KCCQ does not really assess chest discomfort as one of those symptoms that patients with HCM experience. But you'll see that if we do assess chest discomfort scoring by the Seattle Angina Questionnaire, another pioneering tool developed by Dr. Spertus, you can see that there's a dramatic improvement in chest discomfort score as well. So these two graphics really do show a marked improvement in symptom burden, both in heart failure symptoms and in angina symptoms for the patients who are receiving, in again, double-blind fashion, treatment with the tested medication here, aficamten. And just for a second to go over to the bar graphs, which may be a little harder to parse out, that are to the right of this slide. The red bars are showing, once again, patients who are receiving the aficamten versus the blue bars, patients receiving placebo. And if we stratify those patients into those having moderate or large or very large improvements in symptoms, both with the KCCQ and with the Seattle Angina Questionnaire, there's no question, based on even just looking at those red versus blue bars, that patients randomized to receive aficamten have a dramatic improvement, in a high proportion of those patients, very large improvement in their symptoms. So this is the kind of evidence a clinician needs, and a patient likes to see, that a medication doesn't just increase their peak VO2, it's also improving their symptoms, improving their quality of life, reducing the impact of those symptoms on their lifestyle. And that is something a survey like the KCCQ can provide that cannot be provided by the relatively overly simplistic and not very reflective New York Heart Association scoring. So with that, and I'm sorry I took a little bit of time there to go through that.
No, I thought that was helpful.
Let me turn it over
That was
to
great.
Lisa again and Charles to give you more information on, the tweaking of this kind of tool that may help us in the future.
Thank you so much, Rich, and thanks for jumping in here. You did a great job. Appreciate it. So as you're listening to Dr. Bach explain how we were able to use this in prior clinical trials, it sounds like, wow, this is, a great tool, but it's not specific to HCM. And we thought that adding some features that would evaluate a greater HCM experience might connect with patients better. And sometimes when people see the name of this tool, when it's all spelled out, Kansas City Living with Heart Failure, they're not seeing themselves as heart failure. So we want to potentially add in KCCQ-HCM, so patients with HCM will know that this tool was not only created for generalized heart failure, but created for them and is speaking to the issues that they are confronting. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Charles, Dr. Sherrod, and he is going to walk us through what they've created here. And Charles, just give me a nod when you want me to advance.
Sure. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to come. It's an absolute privilege. And, I think we're at a very exciting time in the management of HCM. Not only do we have some tools in our tool chest that we can reach for when patients aren't doing well, but we seem to have more treatments that could be on the horizon. And, and Lisa, you can advance for this. And so, when we're thinking about any of these new innovations, we want to be sure that the way that we're evaluating things really helps patients understand how we can meet their goals. Because, there are always cost trade-offs to new treatments, either the patient's time, their energy, their travel efforts, but there's also needs, including cost, that, we really want to show that there's value added by a lot of these interventions that are really reflective of the way that we're helping patients feel better and live longer. And so, We also want to be sure that as we're trying to roll out these new treatments and study them well, that, we're doing that in such a way that we're encouraging clinicians to adopt these treatments so that we have a real and tangible opportunity to help patients feel their best. Can you advance, Lisa?
I can.
And so, when we're thinking about this clinical encounter where a clinician is seeing their patient living with HCM, one of the most important questions that we have to ask and that we try to get medical students across the country everywhere to do is try to understand how our patients are doing, because ultimately that's one of the primary treatment goals that we have in HCM. And so, it's really simple to ask, how are things going for a patient? But a clinician's job can be very difficult in order to parse that out. And we have a couple of ways that we currently do that within our clinical trials. And so, there's a couple of things that, most clinical studies in HCM do. They get lab testing, they look at cardiac biomarkers, they get a lot of ultrasounds to look at the ejection fraction to be sure treatments are safe. They look at gradients if patients are known to have some sort of obstructive process. They look at diastolic function, leaky valves, but, we often rely on exercise testing. And there's always a couple of limitations to each of these different, assays that we can provide in our clinical trials. And so, there's always variability, which lab test are you going to get? Where is it processed at? Much like Dr. Bach mentioned, there might be difficulty in the interpretability. What is a 20% reduction in someone's lab values for a BNP? While we understand that can be prognostically relevant, what does that mean for a patient who's really struggling with their symptoms? We also know that, when we're getting heart ultrasounds, there's a lot of variability. We know that we have patients bear down to try to figure out what their gradient is. And sometimes it's going to be a lot easier for some people. Sometimes it's more difficult. In the same way that there's a lot of variability in the way that, cardiologists might be interpreting these studies. But at the same time, we're left with the same question of, what does a change really mean here? And I think this is also very well exemplified by exercise testing where, sure, we can find that treatments have a real impact on this. But, for a patient's day-to-day life, this is something that's very unnatural and is not something that people routinely do on a day-to-day basis. And to try to determine what treatments work by this test might not be the most patient-centered way to proceed. And so we're really excited about the opportunities for patient-reported outcomes. And so what we're really trying to do is amplify the patient's voice within clinical medicine and within research settings. And much like Lisa and Dr. Bach had mentioned, we're very excited about the Kansas City Cardiomyopathy Questionnaire, which, some of you have probably filled out before, and you'll get a sense of if you're willing to participate in our survey. As we see here on the right side of the screen when we advance just one more, I believe. It's really a very simple questionnaire that's designed to not take too much time. It's clinically feasible. It doesn't ask every question that we would like it to, but it's something that, has been proven to be valid in HCM, but we think that we can do better. And so, the KCCQ is 23 items. Much like Dr. Bach said, it includes a lot of questions about physical limitations, which symptoms people experience, and the KCCQ largely asks about fatigue, different versions of breathlessness and swelling, but it also asks about how these things impact their day-to-day life. Can they accomplish their physical needs? Can they meet their social needs? And overall, how does this impact their quality of life? The KCCQ has been extensively validated across the spectrum of cardiac disease, and it represents a patient's perspective, so much so that it's been qualified by the FDA as a clinical outcome assessment and has been deemed sufficient to approve drugs and devices for heart failure and valvular disease if scores can improve. But much like we're talking about today, this was not developed explicitly for HCM, and we think that we could probably improve it. And so, we started off on this process to try to figure out how best to go about doing this. And so we did a literature review. We dived into, all the prior data. What is the day-to-day experience like in HCM? What do people think about? What are they worried about? And so we generated a standardized interview guide, and we had a series of focus groups that, we recruited patients much like yourself to tell us what their story was. What were their days like? What made those days good or bad? And how did they know that, they were having a good day or a bad day? What changed? And ultimately, we wanted to know what their symptoms were, what determined their social and physical function, and what was important for their quality of life. But uniquely, we also really wanted to know how people felt about the KCCQ, since it's essentially become industry standard in clinical trials, not only for HCM, but across the board. And so we found a couple of very exciting things. Here's just a representative number of things that we heard. We talked to patients and, we heard about symptoms we weren't capturing, things like chest pain, which Dr. Bach emphasized from the Sequoia HCM study. But we also found things like provoking factors, like bending over and what that means to them. I feel like I'm going to pass out, someone said. Some other people read the questionnaire, and when it starts off, they heard the term heart failure, and they're like, oh my goodness, is that me? I'm young. Did I fill this out right? I feel scared. Other people felt that some items were less relevant, like swelling, while it might be really relevant for other conditions that we use the KCCQ for, it might not necessarily be the most relevant question here. Some other people felt that, when we were asking about their physical activity, that they wanted a lot more granularity because people gave up high intensity exercise, swimming, lifting weights, and that was really distressing to them. But other people noted major quality of life implications, like the feeling of palpitations. I know I'm probably going to be okay, but what if it's VT this time and my device goes off? Other people felt that their HCM limited their social interactions, and other people really had a limited understanding of what some of these symptoms were because they were just recently diagnosed. And so we felt it was extraordinarily important to modify this questionnaire, or at least take steps to be sure that we're doing the best we can. And so we need your help. Our overall goal is to create a better version of this tool that really captures everything that's important to the lives of those living with HCM. But we want this tool to be clinically feasible. We don't want to ask 100 questions to get a sense of every single thing that's happened along the way, but find something to create a general sense of how people are doing so that we can better target our treatments, understand what new ones are going to work, and how to best implement them into clinical practice. And we also want to know that amongst the things that we're asking, are there some items that are less important or redundant, right? For some patients with arrhythmias, that might mean that they have palpitations or they get dizzy. And we want to be sure that we're doing this in the most scientifically rigorous way. And so the way that you can help out is by filling out a survey that will be sent, and the link will be here in the slides as well, to a REDCap survey. We ask that if you do this, you fill it out only once, you fill it out yourselves, and you only fill it out if you are yourself living with HCM. And so we really hope that we can make some headway here. Just to go over a couple of the things that we're going to be asking you in this survey, we have a couple of screenshots in the next couple of slides. We want to know who you are. It's important to know across the board. Are people who have non-obstructive HCM having similar symptoms and similar priorities to those with obstructive? What about those with mid-cavitary obstruction or those with apical HCM? It's also okay if you don't know what kind of HCM you have, because we still believe that your experiences are incredibly valuable. We also want to know, how you were first diagnosed. Are you symptomatic? Is this something that really weighs on you? Have you had genetic testing? And are other members of your family impacted? Because we believe these things are important and also may influence the way that you go about filling out this survey. We move on to the next slide. We're going to ask you a number of questions about symptoms. These aren't all the ones we're going to ask, but we're going to ask you about symptoms over the last 4 weeks and over the last 2 weeks. And we're going to ask you about some of the things we're currently capturing, like shortness of breath and fatigue. But we're also going to ask you about chest pain, palpitations, dizziness, passing out symptoms, and how often you have them, how bothersome they are. And then we're also going to ask you about variability. While the KCCQ in its 23-item form has a symptom stability scale, we've not really explicitly explored the variability in symptoms, which can be a huge determinant in how your quality of life is. And so we want to try to find a way to capture this and capture it well. And we also want to know about what sort of physical activities you're not able to do and what sort of social limitations you might have as a result of your HCM symptoms. This could be things like vigorous exercise, like we mentioned. It could be as simple as seeing your friends and family outside of your home, and hobbies. We're also going to ask things about heavy meals and doing things that we know can provoke symptoms. And so, here's a QR code. You're going to find a couple of other questions in this survey, and I hope that you'll take the time and find it valuable, because I think we have a real opportunity to, improve the quality and value of the care that we're providing to people with HCM. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Lisa and Rich, and as well as anyone from the audience if they have questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was a great run through. I'm going to leave the QR code up here a little bit if anybody wants to just zap it with their phone and they can go right there. A couple of things I just want to bring up to those of you in the HCM community that are used to our surveying. This one's going to look a little different than typically that you receive from HCMA. It's going through REDCap, and we throw that word around like everybody knows what we're talking about. REDCap is a research database managed by Vanderbilt University. We keep our database in a REDCap file. There is a lot of research capability through the REDCap system. So this isn't a very closed system. It's not a publicly available, like you can't just go buy it offline. You have to have a REDCap account. It's very secure. It's very safe, but it's not very pretty. So we typically will use something like SurveyMonkey that looks a little nicer on the front end. This is a very research-focused tool, so it's going to look different than what you normally see from HCMA. It's from us. It's partnered with us, but it is under the IRB of the institution that Dr. Spertus and Dr. Sherrod work for. So that is why it's going to look a little bit different than what you're used to seeing. We are happy to entertain any questions that you may have. We encourage you to share this link with your family members who are also diagnosed. We are not looking for caregiver information on this particular survey. We are only looking for diagnosed individuals. And I will also give the touch point for patients with HCM to remember that sometimes it's hard to know what's normal and not normal because your lived experience may have been impacted by HCM long before your actual diagnosis. So it's okay to not be 100% sure why you feel what you feel, but please report what you feel. Don't try to make rationale for yourself that, well, I think I was getting sick. That's why I felt that. Just report your lived experience. And we're trying to keep this to the last 4 weeks. We know in HCM that you may have one-off symptom moments where you may experience a certain type of feeling that might be related to an arrhythmia or obstruction, but maybe it's once in a blue moon. Don't look for a place to put that in the survey. If it didn't happen in the last 4 weeks, don't report it. If it's something that chronically happens, obviously report it, but something 6 months or a year ago, that would be captured in a conversation with your clinical provider or your research people. We're just looking to validate the tool. Okay, so we have a question comment from Dawn. Thank you for all you do. Literally symptomatic right now. My heart rate's 150. Still waiting on my physician to send information. Dawn, call the office, talk to Linda. Let's see if we can fast track and help you get your records organized so that you can start taking control and get to the next step. I've seen you on a number of web programs, so I know you're out there trying to get some answers. Call the office, 973-983-7429. Ask for Linda, and let's see if we can't help fast track getting these records in because it seems like it's on a slow track right now. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Bach, what do you think? How is our process working? Is HCMA at the right page at the right time here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a need. I think our focus on patient-centered outcomes, again, led by people like Charles and John Spertus here, is the right way to focus. We need tools that will help us to know when new treatments, which luckily for our community are coming, have the impact that we want, and developing these tools to have specific data that will speak to how we feel, how our patients feel, I think is really critical. So it is the right time. The HCMA is doing a great job of reaching out to the community and getting this survey done. Realize then the members who participate in the survey are impacting the future and the future treatments that'll be successful for our HCM population. So I think this is very important. I hope everyone listening to this reaches out and takes the survey and contributes their information. And then with the kind of skills in research that Charles and John Spertus have, a tool can be created that has a major impact on the future success of research in this field. So I'm very optimistic. I'm very happy to hear Charles, promote it and starting this work. This work is important. Let's move forward and impact the field in a very important way.
I will add to my reason for wanting to get involved at this level, which may seem a little bit long visioned to some people. We need really good outcomes, not only to get to a label, which means the clinical trial has to be designed to look at the right things that are impactful to the patient community. And the trial has to prove effective, and it has to get into the payer system with enough support that the payer system sees value too. So we need to make it crystal clear to payer systems we have an advantage here. It's not a little thing, it's a big thing. And if the drug trial says it's only a little thing, then that may be how the insurance company values the product. We know what we've seen with myosin inhibitors already. We know the benefit that it can bring, but we've had a rough hole trying to get people to understand that this is important to us. An opportunity to reduce obstruction without having open heart surgery is important to patients. The opportunity to have an improved quality of life is important and is valuable. So let's make sure we're measuring the right things to show the value of the drugs. They are not inexpensive options. They cost, and we want to make sure that our dollars are going to things that mean the most to the community. So having the patients communicate in as we are designing this tool to be optimized for HCM might be one of the most important things we do all year, is to get that data in. So please take the survey, please share it with others. And if you have any questions, call the office. Charles, any final notes?
No, this is an amazing opportunity. I think this is, one of these moments where I think, the obvious need for this is met with, I think, the right time and the right people. And I think we have a really great opportunity to improve the quality and value of care, and also improve the quality of the research that we're doing for the HCM community. And so, it's an absolute privilege to be able to work with everyone here. And I'm really excited to see what we're able to come up with. And I think the future is very bright.
Okay, I am going to go through a couple of other slides here just to say thank you to my entire team who makes all of this stuff happen. Our board, our staff, our contractors make all of this possible. So thank you to everybody. And we do the thank yous, and that's all of our sponsors. Yes, we have pharma sponsors. Yes, we have funding from pharma. Yes, we're holding pharma to task to make sure that the outcomes that we are looking at are the most important, and we are happy to be partnered with our colleagues within the pharma space. So this is an ecosystem. We are all a part of the ecosystem. We have to work together to get to the best results. So thank you all for your time. Marilyn, who is commenting, it's difficult to separate symptoms. Please do your very best. If we can help in any way, call the office. My staff is here ready to help you. Our intake coordinators will be happy to answer any questions that you might have if you run into any stumbling blocks or you don't know how to answer something. We can provide clarification, but we can't provide the answer. On that, I am going to stop screen sharing. And 3, 2, 1, I'm going to ask somebody else to come to stage with us. So finish eating what you're eating, John. I'm going to bring you up on stage if you want to come for a quick minute and make a closing comment. As the father of KCCQ, I brought John Spurtis to the stage. John, how'd we do? Did we explain your baby
I think
properly?
you did great. The whole focus of my entire career has been trying to let the patient's voice be more clearly understood by physicians, by researchers, by industry developing new products. And the KCCQ was developed really for patients with heart failure due to HFrEF, HFpEF. It has worked well in HCM, but I don't think it's capturing the totality of what you as patients experience. And so this is an effort to build upon our past work and extend it so it's more relevant and meaningful to people like you. And so your help in letting us understand what symptoms you experience most often, how bad they are. That will really help us narrow the many questions we could do, because ultimately you want a very relevant survey that's small, because if it's long, then you don't want to fill out 20, 30, 40 questions, especially if a lot of them aren't relevant to you. So this is really an effort to try and balance what's most important and impactful with what's feasible to collect on a routine basis. So I think Doctors Bach and Sherrod did a phenomenal job. And Lisa, I just can't thank you enough for sort of the light you're giving to the entire community and making us as researchers all be held much more accountable for measuring what's important. So thank you very much.
It takes a village, and we have a big one, and I'm awfully proud of it today because I think we did a great job. Everybody, please take the survey. You're going to be seeing this on social media over the next couple of weeks with different clips from this presentation. Invite your family members back to see the entire presentation. If they have any questions, we're happy to assist them. We are going to set a goal that I'd like to get 500 survey respondents from the community over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So setting the goal, let's hit it. If we can get to 1,000, even better. But this is a responsive community who wants to be part of the future of a better future for their family members and themselves. So there's some real buy-in here. So thank you to everybody who would consider taking the survey. It'll take you 4 to 6 minutes, generally speaking. So it's not a lot of time. So if you want to do something to volunteer for the HCMA this week, give me 10 minutes of your time on this survey. You'll be getting it through multiple sources, but please only take it once if you do get it through email and through your social media. Thank you so much. Thank you to my entire faculty here. You are all great, and we appreciate everything you're doing to help our patients every day. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.